March 2020. New York City. If you had asked me then, I would have told you that my life was fine. Not great, not exciting, just fine. And that was the problem. I was 34, single, living in a tiny Brooklyn apartment with thin walls and a leaky kitchen sink. My job as a project manager at a marketing agency was stable, but draining. Every morning, I'd wake up to the same dull routine, alarm at 7 a.m., a quick shower, coffee I barely had time to enjoy, then a cramped subway ride into Manhattan, shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of other exhausted workers. My office was an open-plan nightmare, fluorescent lights, constant noise, and endless meetings that could have been emails. By the time I got home, I was too mentally drained to do anything but zone out in front of Netflix or scroll my phone in bed. I wasn't miserable, but I wasn't happy either. My job wasn't fulfilling, but I stayed because it was safe. I wasn't particularly close with my coworkers, but I made just enough small talk to not feel like a total outsider. My friendships were mostly maintained through group chats and occasional brunches, where we spent half the time talking about work and the other half pretending we weren't all exhausted. And dating? A disaster. I had tried everything, apps, setups, even speed dating once, never again. It always ended the same way, a few weeks of excitement, then a slow fade into indifference. I told myself I was too busy, too focused on my career, but deep down, I knew the truth. I had lost the ability to connect with people. I wasn't even sure who I was anymore outside of my job and my responsibilities. Then, the world stopped. The first time I heard about COVID-19, I didn't take it seriously. Just another virus, right? But then came the news reports. The rising case numbers. The panicked grocery store runs. And suddenly, life as I knew it was gone. On March 16th, my office shut down, sending us all to work from home indefinitely. At first, I thought I'd love it, no commute, no office politics, just me and my laptop. But the reality was different. The days blurred together in a way I hadn't expected. Without the structure of my usual routine, my motivation crumbled. I worked from my couch in pajamas, barely speaking to anyone. Some days, I forgot to shower until the afternoon. Other days, I barely ate because I just wasn't hungry. The loneliness hit fast. I had always considered myself independent, but there's a difference between choosing to be alone and having no other option. My apartment, once just a place to sleep between work and social obligations, started to feel suffocating. My only human interactions were virtual meetings where everyone looked just as exhausted and disconnected as I felt. To make matters worse, my anxiety skyrocketed. I became obsessed with reading news updates, doom scrolling through Twitter late into the night. The uncertainty was crushing. How long would this last? Would I lose my job? Would I get sick? I felt helpless, like my entire existence had been put on pause. I tried to be productive. I really did. I downloaded workout apps, attempted to cook elaborate meals, even bought a puzzle. But none of it stuck. Nothing felt right. Every day was the same: wake up, work, stare at my phone, sleep. Repeat. Then, one night in April, something changed. I was supposed to be finishing up a report for work, but my brain refused to focus. Instead, I opened a blank Word document. I wasn't sure why. I hadn't written anything creative in years. But something inside me needed an outlet. I started typing. Just a few lines at first, then a paragraph, then a full page. It was a short story, about a woman standing on the edge of a futuristic city, debating whether to leap into the unknown. I didn't think about it, didn't overanalyze. I just wrote. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than numbness. The next night, I did it again. And again. Writing became my escape, my way of making sense of everything happening around me. I didn't care if it was good or if anyone would ever read it. It was mine. But even as I wrote, doubts lingered. Was this just another lockdown hobby? A distraction, nothing more? Who was I to think I could actually be a writer? Still, I kept going. And then, one night, something shifted. As I stared at my screen, lost in a scene, I realized, this wasn't just a way to kill time. This was me, rediscovering a part of myself I had abandoned years ago. The part that had been waiting, patiently, for me to return. I just didn't know yet how much it would change everything. April 2020. The words wouldn't stop coming. Every night after work, I sat at my laptop, letting my fingers fly over the keys. I didn't care if what I wrote was good, I just needed to get it out. Writing became my lifeline. At first, I was just playing around, experimenting. A short story here, a scene there. But the more I wrote, the more I realized how much I had buried over the years, my creativity, my passion, my voice. It was like I had locked away a part of myself, and now, trapped inside my apartment with nowhere to go, I had no choice but to face it. But here's the thing about facing yourself, it's terrifying. For weeks, I fought against that voice in my head, the one telling me I wasn't good enough. Who are you kidding? You're not a writer. You don't even know what you're doing. But every time I opened a blank document, something inside me refused to listen. Then, one night in May, something shifted. I had been working on a story, a sci-fi idea about a woman trapped in a world she didn't belong to. Gee, wonder where that inspiration came from. I was lost in the scene, my heart pounding as I typed, when a thought hit me like a freight train. What if I actually tried? Not just as a hobby. Not just as a way to pass time. But really tried? The idea scared the hell out of me. Because trying meant risking failure. And I had spent my whole life avoiding failure, playing it safe. My marketing job was safe. My predictable routine was safe. Writing, though? Writing was unpredictable. It required vulnerability. It meant putting myself out there. But for the first time in years, I wanted to take that risk. So, I did. The next day, I made a decision. I was going to write a novel. I had no idea how to do it. I had never even finished a short story before. But I dove in headfirst, researching everything I could: story structure, character development, pacing. I started outlining. And then I wrote. At first, it was exhilarating. The words flowed. I was in it. But then, the doubt crept back in. Every time I reread my work, all I saw were flaws. My sentences felt clunky, my dialogue stiff. I started comparing myself to published authors, convinced I'd never be good enough. And then, the worst day came. One morning in June, my company announced layoffs. I stared at the email, my hands shaking. My name wasn't on the list, yet. But the fear was real. I had always thought of my job as secure, but nothing felt secure anymore. For the next few weeks, I lived in a constant state of panic. Every meeting felt like it could be my last. My writing slowed down. I was too anxious to focus, too overwhelmed to be creative. I was back to doom scrolling, back to sleepless nights. That old, familiar feeling of stuck crept in again. Until one night, when I hit my breaking point. I had just closed my laptop after another mind-numbing day of work, my unfinished manuscript mocking me from across the room. I felt like a failure, at my job, at writing, at everything. I needed to clear my head. So I did something I hadn't done in months. I went for a walk. It was late, the streets eerily empty. The city that had once been so alive now felt like a ghost town. Storefronts were boarded up, taxis sat idle, and the only sounds were my footsteps on the pavement. I wandered aimlessly until I found myself in front of a tiny bookstore. It was closed, of course, but the window display caught my eye. A single book sat in the center, propped up like it was waiting for me. The title? Daring Greatly. I stared at it, my reflection in the glass blending with the cover. And suddenly, it hit me. I was scared. That was the problem. I had spent my whole life afraid of taking chances, afraid of failing. And if I kept letting that fear control me, I'd never get anywhere. I had to make a choice. That night, I went home and made a promise to myself. I was going to finish my novel, no matter what. Even if it was terrible. Even if no one ever read it. Because I needed to prove to myself that I could do it. So, I did. I created a schedule, every morning before work, an hour of writing. No excuses. No overthinking. Just writing. The first few weeks were brutal. Some days, I stared at the screen for an hour, barely getting a sentence down. Other days, I wanted to delete everything. But I kept going. And then, something amazing happened. One morning in July, I was deep in a scene when I lost track of time. When I finally looked up, 2 hours had passed. And for the first time in months, I felt alive. That was the moment I knew, I wasn't just passing time anymore. This was real. By the end of August, I had written 60,000 words. A full first draft. It was messy and imperfect, but it was mine. And then, something even crazier happened. On a whim, I posted a snippet of my story online. Just a tiny excerpt. I didn't expect anything. But within hours, strangers started commenting. This is amazing. I need more. Are you publishing this? Publishing? That had never even crossed my mind. But now, for the first time, I was starting to believe it was possible. By September, I was researching self-publishing. By October, I had an editor. And by December 2020, I had made the biggest decision of my life. I quit my job. It was terrifying. But for the first time, I was choosing passion over fear. I was choosing me. And I had no idea what was coming next. But I was ready. This part is super dynamic, full of highs and lows. January 2021. I hit publish. And just like that, my book was out in the world. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen, my heart hammering in my chest. My debut novel, a story I had written in stolen hours, filled with all my fears, dreams, and truths, was now available for anyone to read. It didn't feel real. And then, the panic hit. What if no one buys it? What if people hate it? What if I made the biggest mistake of my life? I shut my laptop and tried to distract myself, but it was useless. I felt exposed, like I had just handed a stranger my diary. I had dreamed about this moment for months, but now that it had arrived, all I wanted to do was take it back. Hours crawled by. I resisted the urge to check my sales dashboard, telling myself to be patient. It's fine. No one even knows the book exists yet. But by midnight, my self-control crumbled. I took a deep breath, clicked the page, and gasped. 50 downloads. 50. It wasn't a bestseller number, but to me, it was everything. 50 people had chosen to read my words. 50 strangers had taken a chance on me. Then, I saw it. Not a flood of reviews. Not a life-changing moment. Just one comment. This book made me feel less alone. Thank you. I covered my mouth, my eyes welling with tears. Because that was the reason I had done this. Not for fame or fortune, but for connection. Because I had spent years feeling trapped and invisible, and now, someone out there, someone I had never met, felt seen because of something I had created. And in that moment, every fear, every doubt, every sleepless night was worth it. The months that followed were a whirlwind. Sales started slow but steady. A few copies a day turned into dozens. By February, I had sold 1,000 copies. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it was more than I had ever dared to hope for. More reviews started appearing. Some were glowing. Some were critical. But that didn't scare me anymore. Because the important part? People were reading my book. My words were out in the world, taking on a life of their own. By March, something even crazier happened. A small book blog featured my novel, calling it an unexpected gem of the indie publishing world. I was flooded with messages from readers. Strangers telling me how my book had made them cry, inspired them, made them want to write their own stories. Then came an invitation to a podcast. Then a second one. Then an email from an indie publisher. They asked if I was working on anything new. I nearly dropped my phone. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just dreaming about being a writer, I was one. I had built a life around my passion, waking up every morning excited to create. I had quit my corporate job, replaced it with freelancing, and even started working on a second book. I wasn't making six figures, but I was earning enough to sustain myself. More importantly, I was happy. And it all started with one decision: to finally bet on myself. I used to think people who changed their lives had something I didn't. More talent. More confidence. More luck. But now, I know the truth. The difference between people who chase their dreams and people who don't isn't luck. It's a choice. A choice to start, even when you feel unprepared. A choice to keep going, even when doubt creeps in. A choice to believe in yourself, even when no one else does. And the best part? You can make that choice anytime. So here's my question to you: what's that thing you've been putting off? What's the dream you've buried because it feels too big or too scary? Because I was just like you. Stuck. Afraid. Convinced it was too late. But it wasn't. It never is. Maybe today is the day you take that first step. Maybe today is the day you finally bet on yourself. And if you do, tell me about it. I want to hear your story.